All right, here we are on day 5 of the Get Design Clients Challenge, and I am hoping that you guys have been getting a lot out of this. I know that some of you have kind of fallen by the wayside. Everybody gets busy. I've been busy myself lately. This week I'm doing a pretty good sized irrigation job for a friend of mine, and I just worked myself again too hard the other day, dealing with some heat exhaustion. So drinking lots of water. Want to make sure that you guys, if it's summer where you're at and really warm, just be careful about being out too long. It's easy to get excited when you're outside, especially working on an edible landscape like I was. And if you can join me, that is awesome. Drop in some questions, etc. Today, we're going to be talking some more about the rates that you charge as a designer and how to even start thinking about that, how to cost out a job so that you're not doing tons of hours of work, not getting paid for it, and how to talk to clients even about what you charge. I talked a little bit about that in day 4 as well. What do you say when somebody asks, what do you charge right up front? So here we go. I've got some notes, punch in some questions so I can start to cover some things that you guys are wondering specifically. So yeah, your rates. Where to start your rates at if you're just starting out, or how to know if your rates are comparable to other designers in your area. How do you even start to think about what to charge for clients? And there are multiple ways to do this. I talked about charging hourly versus charging in a lump sum, just by number of days if you're on site while you're doing designs versus if you're doing things remotely or if you do things over a longer period of time. So for me personally, I use an hourly rate, which for me is $60 an hour, and you guys could easily charge that much. It just depends on what kind of value you can show your clients they're going to get out of a project. But that being said, I don't actually tell clients often what I charge per hour. It's usually something where after the initial consultation, when I actually understand what goes into their project, that's when I can give them an idea of what it might cost in my design proposal, where I lay out kind of what's going to be happening in the design and all that it entails, so that people can understand why it costs so much potentially to work with me. For example, I have a client starting in September who's in this area in Florida, and that's a $2,400 design job, because what I do personally is the way that I market myself is that I mostly do master plans for sites so that I'm able to do larger projects in terms of the amount of money I'm getting, rather than doing just a spot treatment, just a single rain garden or small garden area in someone's yard. I talk about the importance of creating these whole integrated systems, which allows us to work in more permaculture, but also makes it so I don't have to do a higher volume of design jobs to make the same amount of money. So I can make my monthly income on just a couple design jobs a month. Or potentially less depending on how big the job is, and be able to make a healthy living while not overwhelming myself with a number of different clients I'm working with. So I could go down a whole rabbit hole on this stuff, and I'm building all of this into the Professional Permaculture Designer course, which I have a webinar coming up for, and I'll send you guys an email more about that as it comes along with my whole heat related exhaustion stuff. I've been taking some good care of myself. So, and the same goes for you. If you're ever feeling a little bit down or feeling like, you know what, I'm not thinking quite right now, just take a little break, get outside, or just rest and do something you love to do. So as far as where to start your rates, it's an interesting question, because it really depends on the amount of money you feel like you need to make to live comfortably while being paid what you feel like you're worth as a permaculture designer. So it also depends whether you currently have a day job or other sources of income. And I always recommend having multiple sources of income. I do personally, not only do I do design, I also do installation. I also do these online courses, which are a source of income for me, so that I can keep doing them and provide the knowledge and experience that I have to help you guys out and help other people who are just homeowners designing their landscape. But that being said, a lot of designers just start out where they're comfortable. So say if you're costing on an hourly basis, you're not necessarily initially going to be thinking, oh, well, I'm going to charge between $25 and $50 an hour. I think where you should really start is one, understanding more about the amount of money you need to feel comfortable and not only cover your base finances, but have some flexible, disposable income for other projects to build your homestead or to go on vacation, things like that. But also, after you have an understanding basically of your monthly income that you'd like to have to support yourself and your family, um, before you even think of an hourly rate, think of how many hours are going into the design jobs that you're doing, and that depends what type of design you're doing. For me personally, the residential design jobs that I do, since I know my design process pretty well, which I'll share as we go along, as the permaculture designer course develops. Since I have a good idea of the service I'm offering, not only, like I've said, it allows me to convey the value to clients of what I provide, but it also helps me to cost out my jobs accurately because I know, within a certain margin of error, which is usually only like 3 or 4 hours of error within any given project at this point, I know that my design is costed pretty accurately. So for that $2,400 job, that's $60 an hour, but it's 40 hours of work. So you have to kind of get an idea for what you feel comfortable charging, how many hours you want to spend on a project, and how many of those hours you want to be paid for. So not only do you have hours on a design project where you're going to be physically doing the design or documenting the site, taking measurements, looking at climate data, whatever you might be doing, but there's also a lot of background work, such as, creating the proposal and contract for your client, doing some of the background communication via email or on the phone if the client has questions between different phases of the project when you're making decisions. And that's something I really want to drive home is, having multiple meetings with your clients throughout the design process so that it becomes a true collaborative effort. So you guys are working together and you don't have a process that's like, okay, I'll meet you at the beginning and then I'll give you something at the end and whatever happens, and you better like it. That gives you a lot more perceived value when the client feels like they have a lot more of a say in what's happening. But with any project, and this is why I try to do these master plans to have more income per project, is because if you're doing a lot of these small projects, you have a lot of the same administrative tasks, like the contracting, the communicating with the client, the travel to and from the site, the calls to the local nursery if you're in charge of ordering the materials for them. If you get into that install side of things as well, you're going to have a lot of these repeatable tasks that you're going to have to do for each individual client anyway. So why not work out a service that you provide where the products that are your services are larger amounts of income, these master plan types of projects, which not only allow you to, incorporate more permaculture practices into a whole systems design rather than these spot treatments, but also allow you to do less of this administrative work overall so that you can focus more on the design, which is really what matters. Like, we didn't get into this to do all that desk jockey stuff. So that's a really important part of figuring out what you charge as a designer, is to be able to, you're not squeezing as much money as you can out of a client, but you're giving them as much value as possible while you're working together, and that will result in less work overall for you and more billable hours. And those billable hours are what I refer to as billable, are when you're actually doing design work. Things like creating a contract. Sometimes I often actually pay myself an hour for doing that as part of the whole design, but I'm also able to do that because I have these 30 to 40 hour or higher, it's usually around 40, master plans I do for people's landscapes. And so I'm able to incorporate some of that in because there's a little bit of wiggle room in the whole cost. Drop some questions in if you'd like, guys. Otherwise, I'll just keep going with my notes here. So know the average amount of the design work you're seeking. So knowing the average scale that you're going to be working on is really helpful, because that's going to change the amount of hours that go into the design. It's going to change the amount of detail that you're putting into a design. If you're doing something more conceptual rather than detailed for people, it all comes down to, hey, Marion, how you doing? Glad you could make it. I'm guessing Mount Shasta was or is great. Really being able to think about you know, oh, let me go back to my notes here. I always lose my train of thought when I say hi to people, but I enjoy doing that. So knowing the average amount of each job that you're doing is going to help a lot. And starting out with one focal product or service that you offer is going to be so helpful. I see so many people like, for example, Ben Falk of Whole Systems Design. He's a great guy, and I really like what he's doing. And I've got his books and stuff, but on his website he offers so many different services, which is cool in a way because people can then choose kind of a la carte what they want from kind of a menu of services. But especially when you're just starting out, or if you feel overwhelmed in your business, simplifying things so you can get really, really good at one thing is going to be great. So, for example, if you want to get really good at polyculture orchards for small homesteads, you can focus on that. If you want to get really good at residential design for people who want to grow all their own food, or if you want to focus on retreat centers, a certain aspect of the design, having these focal services that you provide is going to help you to focus all your efforts in developing just a streamlined methodology in your design process, but also helps you understand, okay, once you have a couple of designs under your belt that you've costed out and been paid for, you can do time tracking and understand this is how much time this is usually taking, and so you can have a reference point for when you're actually costing out these designs, so you won't end up 10 or 20 hours over in the amount of work you're putting in. And actually, that brings me to another point. And a lot of clients, if you don't have a kind of a clear-cut point in each design process, multiple clear-cut points for when they're providing feedback on the design, they likely will start to, and it depends on the different people, but a lot of clients will kind of start emailing you all the time with little ideas, such and such, and you need to help educate them that you as a designer need to be able to, open the floodgates for their information and input, and then be able to kind of close off and to refine that and work through it, and then meet with them again, or call them or email again, and then you're kind of going in this back and forth, this pulsing of receiving and then interpreting and digesting and designing with their information, rather than having all of this back and forth all the time. That's going to eat up a lot of your time, especially, if it's email, if it's phone, or in person, those all take a lot of time, actually. And let's see. So Kyle had a question here. What about the hours you cannot bill for but are vital for design? Like, for example, talking to a colleague about whether you have time to do the CAD work for design. Do you build in buffer hours? I don't necessarily build in buffer hours for random conversations necessarily with a colleague. However, if I have a colleague who does the design work for me in CAD, I do, say, the pencil sketches, and he or she drops that into the computer, I would know that, okay, I need probably an hour of handoff time to get that person on board with the project and have them understand, or even more so, honestly, to go back and forth, do some red lines on that plan, and be able to go through that iterative process that's so common in design when you're working with somebody else. It really depends what those hours entail, Kyle. So I would say yes, absolutely, you should bill for the time spent getting a project further along in terms of the design and getting it closer to that refined state. That makes a lot of sense. If it's something such as you're just not experienced with a certain aspect of the design process, or you're not super familiar with some of the plants in the area that you're working in, you might not bill for that time just on, it's kind of your own values and what you feel is kind of ethically responsible for what you should bill for and what you shouldn't. Some of the background administrative work, such as spending time billing a client, things like that, I don't charge for normally. I'm usually trying to do my best to only charge for the things that are moving the design farther along to getting the client something useful, rather than the things that are the kind of the background that I just need to do to run my business, which you can work in some extra hours for, but it all really comes down to, do you feel comfortable with the final number that you're telling somebody their design will cost? And, I would say probably if you're adding in more than between 3 and 5% of the total design hours of a project for administrative work is probably over the threshold that I personally think is reasonable. And, I used to want to charge for a lot of that stuff, but it's kind of questionable in the ethics around that. And other people that I've worked with, people that have been mentors or other colleagues, don't often charge for that stuff. So, if you can work that into your hourly rate or work in a couple extra hours in the design job itself, what I do when I do a proposal is I figure out how many hours it's going to be, and I just give someone a lump sum of what that design is going to cost in the design proposal. So I'm not saying it's 40 hours at $60 an hour. I'm just saying this will cost between $2,200 and $2,600. And really giving yourself that range is great because it gives you a little bit of buffer on either end. If it's less expensive, then you can save the client money. And you know what? You'll probably get more referrals out of a client who you saved a lot of money for potentially. But, if you go over a few hours, you can say, oh, well, that's actually $2,500, not $2,400. But this brings up that whole honesty and open communication lines issue with the client, and letting them know when you get to that bottom end of the range so that they can understand, okay, if I keep asking, if they keep asking for changes, et cetera, just let them know if there are things that are going to kind of push the price above and beyond what they might be expecting. That's one of the biggest things that can make or break not only your margin, your profit margin as a designer, but can also kind of break the trust that you have built with a client. And you've gone through so much work to get a client anyway. You really want to make sure that you're doing the best job you can and honoring this kind of transparency that you can help create trust with your clients and the way that you communicate with them. So that being said, something I had been on, and I keep losing my train of thought. I was out in the hot heat this week, and it's kind of affected my mind. So change orders are a huge aspect of where you can lose income as a designer. And if you're not familiar with what change orders are, it's when something happens when the client says they would like a change, such as you've done the entire planting design for a project, and the client says, actually, instead of aronia and apples, I'd like these other things. And then that might change the whole system you're using. It might even change the whole swale layout or the irrigation, the support plantings. For every change a client's asking for, you'd be surprised. It might seem small, but it could actually create a huge trickle-down effect in the amount of time it takes you to make those changes based on the programs you're using to create your plans, based on the thought that's gone into creating this kind of hierarchical design and removing one of the blocks from the bottom. It could be like a Jenga game where it all falls down. So be really careful about that stuff. And what I share in the Professional Permaculture Designer course is my template for a design proposal, which also includes the protocol for what happens when a change order is asked for the with the client, and so the client understands that if that change order is asked for, if it's not something that was included, or if it's an extra, if we're kind of going backwards in the design process after we've already gotten the client's approval on various steps and moved forward, then there's a certain process for figuring out how much extra that's going to cost, etc. So the proposal that I create is all about laying out how this relationship works and the boundaries set for these certain types of situations. So if a client asks for something that you consider a change order that wasn't included in the initial way that you laid out the contract, or if it's something where it's going to, going backwards in the design process, creating extra work for you, that's a chance for you to be honest with the client and say, hey, actually, with this change that, we already approved this phase of the project, but you're asking for this change now, either you can pay extra for that because of this laid out in the proposal, so you can refer back to this piece of paper that you signed together, letting them know it's either going to cost more, or leaving it as it is and the potential benefits and drawbacks of each, discussing things in a transparent way. Keeps that trust. And you'll often find that, either there's going to be a good outcome either way for the most part. and either you're not going to go forward with the change order they requested, or they'll end up paying you a little bit extra, and you can get back to them in a couple days telling them how many extra hours that might be. You never have to give someone an exact answer right away. I think a lot of clients will appreciate hearing from you. I'd like to take my time with that and figure out exactly what goes into it, so I don't give you something that's not accurate or something that's not fully thought out. That'll really help a lot. So that's an awesome question, Kyle. Thank you for asking that. You've always got great stuff to put in here. So we talked about hidden costs, and you know what? It's really okay to learn from mistakes. As I said, mentioned in, I think, day 3 with the mistakes designers make, another mistake we all make is undercosting a design potentially, and you might go over in a design. It's never an issue to approach a client and say, and be honest with them. And although it can be hard and feel weird about potentially requesting more money, or saying, if you would like to honor the fact that I'm spending 10 more hours on the design than I thought, if you'd be comfortable paying between $200 and $500 for that, wherever you fall within that, you could do something like that. You could choose to not charge for it at all, and but let the client know when you're going over, or when you're within a few hours, especially if you're charging hourly, which I recommend because it's just so much easier to break things down. If you're within a few hours of the initial tier of your range, or the number that you'd specified, if you have a single number you're working with, I recommend ranges because it gives you that buffer space. Let the client know when you're getting close to those numbers, when you're creeping up there, because they don't want to spend a ton of extra money if it's not explained to them beforehand that that's going to happen. And it's so common when you're working with contractors. Let's say if someone's doing your gutters on your house, people will lowball and give you a cheap estimate on what it's going to cost, and then they'll tack on extra fees and stuff. You don't want to be that person. You want to be straightforward and say, hey, we're getting close to the top. This is what I have left to do. I could just do these couple things with the last couple hours, or we could, if we can add on another $300 to the design, I can then finish this up and really give you what I wanted to provide. I apologize that, I'm you could say you're relatively new or something. You can say I'm working on a new design process or something like that. You don't need to be self-deprecating. You can say, hey, I'm figuring out a new way of doing these things, doing them better, and it's turning out it's taking a little bit longer. Could we figure out some way that, is reciprocated in terms of if you're getting money, or if maybe they give you a couple extra referrals or a testimonial or something, making sure you get something in return. That's goes along the lines with what I talk about, regardless whether you're doing permaculture designs for money or for work trade or whatever in the beginning. With any of these exchanges, you're going to do a lot better work if there's some type of reciprocity, if you're getting some benefit out of it beyond just doing things out of the goodness of your heart. And I know all you are great people. I do my best to be, do good for the world too, but it's just, flat out, it just feels a lot better to be paid for what you're doing, or get some tangible benefit out of it. So don't be too hard on yourself if you end up going over hours on a design job, or if you forget to let a client know that you are going over and there's a little bit of tension, or not everyone's going to be upset about these things, but be okay with the fact that you need to be able to do these designs over and over again to get good at things. I still make errors all the time, but I've become more and more comfortable with the fact that that happens. So Marion says he does his own installs. You don't mind giving some design time as a perk to the client. Yeah, so if you do installs, especially if you do have a markup on some of the materials you buy, or if you can work in some more out of your hourly rate into the install side, you can definitely cover some of your design costs in that. And, I've worked with other people who do that as well. I find that I'm obviously able to spend more time on a design if I'm charging for the design work itself. However, if you really enjoy doing the installs and you know that you can do the design really quickly, and you're able to be accurate enough with the materials and the time it's going to take you to actually install things, then that could be a viable way to go for sure, to have it more heavy on the install side than the design side with your business. And I think a fair number of you are going to end up doing that. I do that a little bit in my business, although I mostly do designs, but I find more and more that the types of people that I'm focusing on as clients are the do-it-yourself types of people. So either they're going to want my help with some aspect that they don't feel comfortable doing themselves, or what I'm starting to offer is install coaching, where it's just side by side, and they pay me a reduced rate. It's not my $60 an hour design rate. It's more of like, I usually charge 30 for my install labor, but I'm also coaching them, so they're getting more out of it. So I'm able to charge more. I could probably charge even more than I do for that stuff, but it's great to be able to educate people while you're on site with them. But that does make sense, Marion. You can work some of your, you can make up some of your design time being paid for that on the install side. Although I don't necessarily, there are multiple ways to do that. I don't personally do that because I enjoy a more detailed design process, and I also provide a lot of clients with a very detailed stepwise plan of, this year, 2 years, 3 and 5 years down the line, this is what you'll do, this is what you'll put in based on what we've talked about. These things should go in first, the hardscape, and then plantings get filled out over time. I give them a very detailed plan with lists of the plants and materials and quantities and things like that they'll actually be using to put it in themselves. So I'm able to, charge a fair amount for design because I'm giving them a how-to guide, basically an owner's manual for their landscape, in effect. Thank you for mentioning that, though. That was great to cover. So talking about sealing the deal with clients and how to actually get to a point where they're saying yes, and it's very, it's very straightforward on what you are actually providing, etc. So I'm not going to get as deep into that today. If you have specific questions, feel to drop them in right now. But I'm going to be hosting a webinar likely next week, and I'm still working on planning out my whole schedule for the next couple months here to figure out when exactly everything's happening. But as part of giving you guys more of an idea about what being a professional permaculture designer is really about, I'm going to be providing a live webinar in the near future on how to actually seal the deal and what goes into those conversations to make them smooth, what types of paperwork happens, and how to really build your own confidence in your ability to sell. It's really what it's all about, because the paperwork and stuff, that stuff is important, but what it really comes down to is feeling natural when you're selling and closing a deal with a client, and making it feel more like two friends talking rather than a kind of a stuffy professional situation where there's a lot of mistrust or miscommunication happening. So that's obviously, the next kind of step that we take after we're understanding our how we're going to find clients, how we're going to reach out to them, some of the initial mistakes we can make of not being able to kind of get onto their site, get into their product, and understand what's happening. Sweet, Kyle, that sounds great. I'll totally keep you guys posted. And I'm in this for the long haul, so I haven't been doing the professional permaculture designer stuff very long, guys. In terms of teaching, I've been designing for quite a while, but this is something I'm embarking on with you. So you are actually my first group, my first kind of cohort and group of friends that I've made to help out and build your design businesses and help that all evolve. So I'm super excited to keep going with this. This isn't something where I'm going to drop off the deep end. I'm definitely in this for the long haul because I want to see you guys find success and be able to share that as you go along. But also, let's just heal the planet and feed people. So being able to seal the deal is obviously a crucial part of that. And once you find those clients, it really doesn't take that long if you have a pretty smooth, streamlined system for going from initial contact to actually sealing the deal. And that's what that webinar is going to cover. Yeah, absolutely, Kyle. So I've been working a lot on more kind of just following my intuition about getting people more involved in the Facebook group. And if you guys have any ideas, or if you would like to start posting some of your ideas and things, I'm going to start posting some daily cues in the Facebook group, such as what's your quick win for the week? And then another day, what's your quick fail? Things like that. So we can start to share more of our wins, but also our vulnerable side and my own vulnerable side, because as the teacher, there's sometimes this feeling of, oh, I should feel like I'm the perfect one and that everyone should look up to me. And I think you guys will get a lot more out of this if you can realize that we're all on the same page, and that I'm not a fluke, that people like Marion who already have a design business aren't, one in a million, that you guys can all do this, and that we should all be doing it, because you're obviously really passionate and interested in this stuff, and you have a lot of the training you already need to at least get the first couple steps and get your first clients going. So as you start your permaculture design business, or start growing it and moving in different directions, just realize that, any new way of life requires a slightly different way of thinking about things and actually doing some planning. So rather than kind of frantically diving into looking online or looking around in your community for places to go and people to meet, I think that's great. I'm glad that you have the drive to do that. I know a lot of you are super excited to get out. Take a little bit of time and just kind of write down like where you want to be, where you want to go, but also how you actually want to do this. And think of some of the things that you see as obstacles for yourself. And that's not just like personal doubts, things like that I've talked about before, but aspects of business that you don't know yet, or people you'd like to reach out to learn more. Who are the people that you'd like to be able to build professional relationships with, to be able to learn more about the type of work they do that might be similar to you. And those are things that I'm kind of reiterating, but I guess what I've been finding as I've been starting up this group and also in my own design business is that you can't go into it thinking the way that you once did. And that's not a bad thing. It's a great thing. It's a real strong time of growth, and being able to understand that you will change as a person, and for the better if you do this work ahead of time, understanding where you want to be and the type of lifestyle you dream of having, which your business will then fit into really well, versus waking up in a couple of years and realizing you're working 80 hours a week just trying to make ends meet, and you haven't implemented some of the things that we're talking about here, and then also in the webinar and the professional permaculture designer course. So it absolutely helps doing installs, Marion. That's big. And I personally grew up doing a lot of gardening and was a farmhand for many years. Learning how things actually go into the ground is so important. And even if you don't have current installs going on for your business, you can reach out to other landscape designers in the area. Like I mentioned, potentially doing some job shadowing, going around to the sites that they work on. That could even get you a potential job if you're looking for that, to gain more experience from another designer. But yeah, just really knowing the ins and outs of how things get put together is huge, because there are so many designers and landscape architects. It's actually very common for landscape architects who are trained in these higher level institutions, kind of separate from the real world, to provide designs that are just not buildable. Like the way that something is drawn, the way that something is put together, maybe it doesn't fit through the gate, this feature that you're trying to put in doesn't fit into the backyard where you actually need access, or the plants aren't actually going to work for the site as it is. Really understanding that hands-on stuff is huge. So having your own site helps a lot. And also just, getting some gardening jobs potentially to as a side income stream while you're getting going with design. And by the way, offering your services as a permaculture gardener, organic gardener, etc., for people's landscapes is a great way to start to offer people some ideas about how they could improve their landscapes. You may actually get design clients out of it. You can start to do small designs to work into your install or gardening services if someone's looking to fill in an area with plantings, and you can start to build some of those relationships. And, for a long time, I was actually kind of afraid to do install, partially because it is hard work at times. But I was afraid that I wouldn't do things right, or that I messed something up, especially as hardscape goes with patios and laying some of that stuff down rather than the plantings, which is what I have more experience in. But it's just so great to get out into the field. And even if you're a designer who goes out to people's properties and spends time walking around with them, etc., it's really easy to fall into the trap of just being stuck behind a computer doing designs. rather than kind of out in the field helping people out. So that's actually something I'm working in more to my design business as we go. Even though I have a small car, I can't fit many plants in it. I can't take huge loads of mulch over to people's houses, things like that. There are ways to work around that, such as getting plants delivered to a site, getting mulch dropped off by an arborist. If you have any struggles like this that may be keeping you from, doing install or actually getting out to clients' homes, things like that, let us know here. And I know all of us have come up against different obstacles in our lives, whether it was as in permaculture, whether it was in an administrative role in another company, things like that. We all have a lot of experience that we don't realize would be helpful for other people. So I totally agree with the fact that you really want to understand how these things go together and maybe attend some permaculture workshops, lead workshops. That's another great side income stream as well. Leading a workshop just on creating a compost bin for your backyard. When I gave my talk on edible native landscapes at the library earlier this week, which I got a couple great client leads from, I'm following up with, I was able to ask people, I was able to find out much more about my audience and who I want to target my design services to by asking them questions, letting them ask me things. And they said, when are you giving your next talk? We loved it. And I said, well, sometime soon. I don't know what it'll be on. And a couple of them said, do it on composting, do a workshop on that. And so I was able to, understand exactly what they'd like to learn about in the future. But doing workshops on the ground is a great way not only to get outside, meet people in person, show them so much about permaculture and how to make their gardening easier, more nourishing for them, the food they're growing, but also to be able to know how things get put together, to spend the time to research that, to actually earn some income, being able to learn how the install actually happens on the ground, talking with other people who have done it before. It gives you that impetus to kind of force you into learning these things. Yes, absolutely. So Kyle and Marion, I totally agree with all of what you're saying. Knowing how things get put together on the ground, the logistics about how a design comes together are so important, and a lot of clients really need to know. As part of my design packages and as part of what you offer, I would highly suggest phasing as part of the designs you offer. And that's another added value that people really appreciate is, how do I stage this project? What should go in first? I only have $2,000, the client's saying this, I only have $2,000 for my installation this year, but as we go along, I'd like to keep putting things in. And that's where providing a master plan for the site comes in handy so well, is that you're then able to tell them, okay, so we have this full design with the detail of all the materials and plants that are going in. This is what you'll do first. You'll put in your fruit trees first, or you'll put in your patio and walkways first, whatever is happening, whatever's their priority. So once you have these, and when you also have multiple communication points, multiple meetings with the client throughout the design process, you can get a better idea for what their priorities are as the design comes together. Absolutely, Kyle. Teaching is the best way to learn, and I want you guys to also work in a lot of teaching and education into the design process. It's not only going to benefit you of being able to learn a lot more of the intricate ins and outs of how things go together and help your client ask you the questions that are going to test you. Mm-hmm. And granted, you don't need to know all the answers to what clients ask you. Like I said, you never have to give a client an answer right off the bat at that exact moment. You can take a couple days to say, hey, I'd like to do my research. That's really one of the things you're hired for as a permaculture designer, is you don't have to know absolutely everything, and you will expand your knowledge base so much more and become an expert on what you do. But you're really also hired to know where to find the information and how to sift through it to know whether it's valid and whether it should be put into practice on someone's yard. But then again, so again, that phasing aspect is really huge in being able to help people and provide them value, to be able to charge more for your designs. But you, as a designer who has done some installation work, will also know, okay, it makes sense to do this before this in the landscape, and this final planting or this final piece of the puzzle should come in last, because it's not going to disturb as much as putting in a larger structure or cistern, things like that. So you guys have so many great comments here. I'm gonna take a second to look through this. So Marion says he likes to build a guild of people that have skills in areas either he doesn't have or don't want to do it himself, doesn't want to do. You can give each other referrals, can rely on a project getting done properly. So that's one of the greatest aspects of being a permaculture designer, is that we are thinking about things holistically, and we build relationships with allied professionals. That could be a local architect who has a similar maybe natural building mindset, things like that. Plumbers, or they could be carpenters who are building arbors and fences. People who do metalworking, people who do rainwater systems and irrigation. If you don't want to specialize in those certain things, you can either, build relationships with them where you're referring each other. You can end up building partnerships where you know that you can work in that time to a design job for them and subcontract, or you can know that it'll take you a couple hours to interact with that irrigation specialist while you're doing a design. So you can work that time that you need to spend helping that expert help you help the client into your design costing. And that's, having these relationships is huge. It's not just about knowing someone and hoping that, since they know who you are, they'll provide referrals, but building these relationships that actually necessitate other professionals to share your name with clients and say, hey, Pete Wyden is awesome at making food gardens with native plants as well, and I think you'd really like him. So since I'm doing the irrigation, call Pete, and he can do the actual planting design for you. Or for whatever you guys do, think about some of the aspects, some of the components of the projects that go into what you do, the designs that you're doing. Also, even getting in touch and getting familiar with some of the people who work at the local city and the county, or local government, who have something to do with the environment and conservation, things like that. There may be tax incentives for the homeowners or property owners that you work for, that you can build in extra benefits by the people you know. You can get these referrals. Other opportunities open up for you to be able to speak and to be able to attend events, but also just to get more clients to your design business. And then working with these other experts and building a guild, which I love that term, Marion, of these other professionals, gives the client that much more value, because each component of the project would then be completed by someone who has some expertise in that, if you don't feel like you either want to or have the experience to do that. And that comes down also to your niche and what you decide to specialize in. If you happen to find the right people, you can totally specialize in planting design or water systems or passive solar, being able to provide entertaining spaces for people's yards, things like that. And you'll build a suite of services around that, but you can have your specialty that people are actually coming to you as an expert for. So I'm so glad that you guys, Kyle and Marion, and I hope some of you other designers out there are working on building some of these relationships with experts that are allied professionals. Even if they're doing permaculture design, getting to know people and really what they're about is so helpful, because you'll actually find out that you're not doing the exact same thing. Even if you're both doing designs for perennial farm systems, you'll have different specialties and interests. It's just the nature of who we are as unique individuals. And that also helps you to be an expression of yourself and feel natural in your business and what you do on a daily basis, doing something you love that you can do every day without feeling tired and, without the frustration of feeling kind of bogged down by your work. It's something you're truly interested in, and then can hand off these other aspects of design to professionals in your guild that you create. That's huge. So with that, I will probably sign off pretty soon, guys, unless you have any other questions. As far as your rates and what you charge clients go, it is ultimately up to you, but it really also just depends on what you feel comfortable with and what you think clients will go for. Don't be afraid to, give a client a number that you think feels a little bit high, especially if you're able to explain very clearly what all goes into that design, either in a conversation with them or in the proposal. I highly recommend these in-person conversations. It could be over the phone as well. If someone can see your face, though, it's much easier for them to say yes rather than being on the phone or email. and being able to let some of the other thoughts they're having, all the doubts and things, be able to kind of change their perspective on things. That being said, if you're just starting out, you may do some projects for a lower amount, such as this irrigation job I just did. I may have done it for $100 less than I, might have been optimal, although I'm realizing I costed it out pretty well. But I just really wanted to get some work because I'm just starting out my business in Florida. I want to get exposed to more people. I want people to know that I do good work. And with this irrigation job especially, it's not something I do that often. And to be able to get that income is really great for me. So the benefit I received from even charging a little bit less than I might normally is still great enough to me that I feel really good about what I'm doing, and I can do a great job knowing that there's a great value exchange going on. So with all that being said, I will let you guys know in the next couple days when that webinar is going to be on sealing the deal with your clients. And I'm going to do some more thinking on, creating guilds of professionals in your area, in your niche online around the world. There are some other people doing that as well. The Permaculture Research Institute has a group of professionals that work with under the name of Jeff Lawton, but also kind of banded together with their different expertise, and they're doing a bunch of work around the world on permaculture design. My friend Dan Halsey, who owns a business called Southwoods Permaculture, you can look him up. He's a fellow Minnesotan, although I'm obviously down here in Florida. He's actually doing a project in Haiti right now, but he's building a network of designers who I may end up working with them in the future, but for now, they're doing a lot of work around the world, but especially in the tropics. That's one reason why I moved down here, to be able to explore the subtropics and get more experience, so I could do some more international work in these different areas. So let's see, Kyle asks, what is my process? How do you bill for each phase and give the option of just getting a specific phase, for example, a site visit and an interview? Well, so that's an interesting question, because I currently, and probably until I get too busy that I don't have time for it, I currently do these initial site visits for free. And it's just an hour, so there's a set time. You're welcome, Marianne. Thanks for joining. There's a set amount of time that I'm going to be there. I tell people up front it's just an hour. So since I'm doing it for free, I'm not going over that time. I have, a built-in out. So I can say, hey, I have to go. Sometimes I'll stay longer if I feel like it's a project that's probably going to happen, and I can just learn more from the client, and they can feel like they've, really spent some quality time with me. I don't bill in separate phases currently. So since my projects are smaller, they're just, 1 hectare or less in size, a couple acres or less in size. I don't bill in separate phases. So if I was doing a larger project, or a project that had to have some permitting happen, or some special expert consultation other than me in the middle, I might bill for different phases, especially if, say I do the initial part of a design, I do the initial concept without the detail, and then some permitting needs to happen so that we know that we can put in a certain structure or a water system or something. And, if that permit goes through, then we can continue. If it doesn't go through, then we don't. Then I would bill separately in phases, because I don't want the client to have to pay for something where I might not be doing that second half of the design based on if that permit goes through. That's an example where I would bill separately for phases. I don't usually break things down a la carte like that for people to choose from more of a menu. I do this master plan so that I can ensure that I'm not doing a bunch of small little trinkety designs that are only a couple $100s each, because I want to be able to make a living and not be working all the time. So it minimizes the amount of hours I have to spend, because like I said, all that administrative work, that client communication, creating documents, creating plans, etc., you have to do all the same stuff for a client anyway for each person you work with. So that's why I try to work in one lump. And that just makes it simpler for the client too. There's a lot more room for miscommunication, a lot more room for the client or you to forget to bill or pay for a certain thing. People like a really easy process, so I try to keep it as streamlined and straightforward as possible. Not only for the client's benefit, but for myself. Back at my design studio, which is just my kitchen table right now. I'm also going to be going through my portable design kit in the Professional Permaculture Designer, which I'm super excited about. It's this little bin I carry around me with all my design stuff, and that's what I've got here that I work out of. But yeah, my process is this lump design, and that's the proposals I lay out, what all is going to be in that design, so that people just have one, they make actually two payments. I usually have people pay me half up front and half after, depending on how much the design is for and what they're comfortable with. But I've actually never had a client not be able to do that. And that also goes along with the types of people I work with. I work with homeowners who I know can actually afford my services. And that doesn't mean I can only work with rich people. It just means I work with people who value what I can provide and really, really want to be growing food and providing habitat in their landscape, things like that. Because of my niche, people start to understand that they can actually pay a couple $1,000s for a design because of the lasting benefit and the step-by-step plan that I give them. Yeah, yeah. So well, I don't know exactly what you mean by less options, Kyle, but I do, I'm able to provide a lot of different services and expertise within the master plan. But yeah, there's less options for how the design process works. I lay that out because I'm the designer, I'm the professional, and if you can also minimize the client's decision-making needs to just being able to provide ideas and feedback on the actual design versus having to choose between things, I would think that you'd find that most people choose a cheaper option. And we might feel good about that because someone who doesn't want to spend as much money may be able to save some. But you know what? In the end, a less involved and detailed design is often just going to be less valuable for the client. And so that's something you can talk about with people, is that doing the full spectrum, the full kahuna design is going to give them that much more benefit. It's going to actually create these integrated systems. It's going to make it so they don't have to come back and redo things later. Everything's done at once, so they only have to work with a designer once, and then they can come back to you, with questions in the future if you want, and you can establish whether you charge for that or not once you're done with the design. But really just making it simple and straightforward and providing that all-inclusive design package rather than this menu of different things. And you can do it whatever way you want. This is just the way that I suggest doing it, especially when you're just trying to start a successful business. You want to make things as simple as possible because you're going to be focusing a lot on marketing, getting out there, talking with people, trying to figure out what your design process actually is, trying to figure out your website, which I'll go over more as well in the course. So I'm super excited to talk with you guys more at the webinar, which will be coming up soon. I'll keep you guys posted on when exactly that is, on sealing the deal, on actually being able to close the deal with clients, and then you can actually do the design that you're trained and are so excited to do. Thank you so much, guys, for all the awesome questions and comments. Feel free to leave more. I get an update when all that happens. I know when you've dropped in a comment. And I'm going to set up some more cues for you guys to be able to share and for us all to be able to interact in the Facebook group as well, so we can really make a community around this, and we can create our own guild of permaculture designers who have different expertise, who can share our life experience and really help each other out. So I'm just looking forward to everything, and I hope you guys have a beautiful weekend. Please reach out to me in any way that you feel, especially in the Facebook group is really easiest because I'm a little addicted to social media and it gives me a great excuse to use Facebook. So happy you joined me. I had a lot of people on today and it's just been really wonderful. So peace and love. Make the world beautiful. Bye, guys.